Okay. Hi, Jason. Great to see you again. For those who don't know you, you are an amazing chief marketing officer and marketing leader in general. You have been in very technical companies like Heroku, Algolia, and Salesforce, and you have a ton of experience. Um, and we wanted, to just discuss a little bit about how do you see the role of, digital experiences and the website in the marketing world, and specifically, how should marketers think about digital experience platforms and technologies and the relationship with engineering and IT.
Yeah, let me know where you'd like to start. Love talking about this.
So I think maybe we cover a little bit of history. I think and originally, the world of monolithic digital experience platforms was there, and it still is here, right? Where one suite offers all the tools that you theoretically need. So did you have any experience with those, and what could you tell us about those types of like monolithic systems?
Yeah, so I've been doing this now for, I don't know, 25 years. I started my career as a developer back in the 90s, building like the first versions of content management and e-commerce systems. And call it like a 7-year cycle that the world sort of like people go into like, in the past it was like ASPs, like application solution providers, and it was like microservices. And so things kind of go like this, right? Where it's like you'll have like tons of vendors building sort of discrete services. Then the big guys will acquire them and sort of build these like monolithic platforms, which is like, hey, Miss CMO, I now have everything that you need in sort of a one-stop shop. Uh, the issue sometimes with when you buy sort of the big monolithic, or one of the issues when you buy sort of the big monolithic platforms, is quite often by the time that those companies acquire the companies, the software is outdated, right? And then those companies spend 3, 5, whatever years sort of working on integrations, and by then the world's moved on, like new technology, new deployment, new form factors, like things like the iWatch or the Peloton or your Tesla car. It's just like it's really hard when you're sort of like a bigger company to just kind of keep up with that.
Mm-hmm.
And a story that I shared with you, I don't know, maybe a year ago at this point, is like back when I used to work at one of these Fortune 500 companies as a CMO. We bought one of the big expensive monolithic players, spent millions of dollars on this thing, and over 3 years, we never got to the point where the business was able to deploy something.
Wow.
Because it was just like so hard to find developers who were like, focused on it. It was very like sort of monolithic. And as a CMO, like one of the things that I've seen at the companies that I'm at is it's not just about web, right? When you think about, sort of like what is web or whatever, it's like I need my experiences to be able to work like in product across apps.
Yeah.
Those apps can be deployed, like I said, on a Peloton bike and a Tesla car and an Apple Watch. It'll be deployed across dozens of languages, French, Spanish, Japanese, Mandarin, whatever, across like dozens of developers and dozens of time zones. And that could be really hard when you have sort of like a monolithic platform that, is written in an older language that wants to control an entire user experience and needs to be able to run everything. And it's like, well, you can't run everything because you're going to be able to pull pricing, packaging, tax display, sign in from all these other services. It gets really hard really fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems very much like, now I remember that you've shared this with me, and it seems exactly the point where you have to essentially make a decision at the end. If you build your own internal solution or you buy this, full suite, which in many ways I think ends up in a place where it either fits you or it doesn't. And especially the bigger you are as a company and the more content sources and complexities you have, the less chance of a perfect fit.
Yeah.
And so now that you're obviously have a very technical background, and you're very well versed in the new modern world of how applications and websites and all of these are built. What is your kind of takeaway of the main benefits, and what should most of the marketing leaders know about this?
Yeah, and I still find that most marketing leaders are not as technical as they probably should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that it can be scary, right? If you grew up in brand, you grew up in demand. I mean, even demand has become incredibly technical. But if
Yeah.
you grew up in, some of the non-technical marketing aspects, it can sound very IT-ish.
Hmm.
right? When people are talking about headless and composable and services and APIs and, sort of like different form factors. Uh, and so I would say if that's not you, then you need to start staffing up people on your team who really understand that.
Hmm.
And I compare it to like the digital transformation that retail went through maybe like 15 years ago,
Hmm.
right? Like when it first started, 15 years ago. And again, at this point, I was at, Adobe or whatever, selling like Marketing Cloud. Uh, at that point, like almost all sales still took place in brick and mortar stores. Right. And so for a lot of companies, it was really hard to justify spending millions of dollars on new technology to run e-commerce and sell on website. Companies had internal conflicts like channel conflict and like, oh, how do we sell direct when we have like, our partners want to sell on their sites?
Yeah.
Um, and you'll see that the companies that made the investment in the leap are the ones who are thriving now. Right. And you'll notice like several other brands who didn't make the leap, like it's really
Mhm.
hard to catch up 15 years later. Right. Because basically they've lost their customer base and their brands are seen as outdated. When you think about like what is web and how do you interact with your customers, like it's much more than a .com,
Mhm.
right? As I mentioned, it's like your app, it's your phone, it's your watch, it's your car, your whatever the form factor may be. If you're not making those investments now, and if you're not hiring people on your team who really understand the technology that comes together, I would be really worried that your company's going to get left behind, right? Like you need to be making those investments and sort of understand, even if that's not your core competency as a marketing leader, you need to make sure you have leaders on your team who are very technical. And it's not just for web. I mean, it's all things like marketing automation, customer lifecycle, customer understanding. The whole marketing world is like moving this way, right? Like people
Mhm.
aren't using like big CRMs so much anymore. They'll have pieces of things in Segment, pieces of things in Snowflake, and they're sort of piecing together to go like, what's the real brain? And then now, like, that's sort of like, how do I serve that right experience, like on the actual like touch points? So,
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so let's assume that now you have, as a marketer, you have the access, right, to that technical competency, right? Either on your team, an engineering partner, a digital, director. Maybe it's even like an agency or somebody who's like, trying to sell you a solution, right?
yeah.
What are the questions you should be asking, or rather, when you're thinking about, transforming or updating or going in a specific route, what are the key things that you're thinking about? Like this needs to be, I don't know, like future proof. It needs to, like, I need to make changes. What are those points that you're thinking about and you'd advise others to think about when doing this?
Yeah, I think it depends on what type of company you are, what type of industry you're in,
Hmm.
which is like if you're a smaller company or a digital first company, or if as a marketing leader, you're also like the chief digital officer who sort of like drives the overall customer experience, then you have a lot more purview to make changes.
Hmm.
Right. If you're sort of in a bigger company where you're responsible for marketing, but you have a product leader who's your peer, who's responsible for the product experience, then what I would probably do is I'd probably start small, on discrete problems or whatever that you can solve with like a modern architecture, sort of like find your feet and sort of wins,
Hmm.
and then work backwards and try to drive change across a larger organization. So there's a whole bundle of questions around it. Like it depends on what kind of company you are, right? And like what your setup is. Like if
Right.
you're a product-led growth company where marketing is running the overall digital and customer lifecycle experience, you have a lot more leeway to make changes. Um, as far as evaluating vendors, one thing that I would be mindful of is you need to be future thinking,
Hmm.
right? Around like, okay, what are the technologies that can get me to where I want to go? And sometimes when you hire people on your team that are those like technical experts, they could be a little too prone to sort of chasing like the newest shiny object,
Hmm.
right? And the flip side that I've run into is I come into companies and I was like, oh my gosh, we own like 50 different technologies that have like total overlap with each other because we bought like every little vendor, right?
Right.
And that's where, a couple things, like I would start off with like a prototypical, call it 2 year, 3 year sort of capabilities roadmap.
Hmm.
Like, what are the things that I need to be able to do in my company? And like, what are the solutions that I need to be able to get there and know that it's going to change, right? Like every quarter you sort of revisit it and go, okay,
Yeah.
like what's working, what's not working, like what vendors are working and whatnot. But I always begin with the end in sight of like, like how do I imagine the world's going to be? Like, how am I going to control and sort of like maximize my customer experience, 2 years, 3 years down the road? And what are the investments I should be making now to do that?
Hmm.
So you should have a strong opinion. It's a strong opinion loosely held, right?
Yes, I
Of like
love that.
Yeah, it's like a here's what I think, but I know the world's going to change a lot. But at least now I have like a straw man, right? Sort of a skeleton that I can execute against. The
Hmm.
other thing, when I'm talking to vendors, one of my first questions is always, who else do you have that looks like me? Like,
Mm.
show me like, problems that are similar to mine that you've solved, right? Because like, salespeople tend to be really good salespeople, right? And
Right.
one of the things, like when I started my career, one of my first jobs was like a solution engineer, where it was basically like the sales guy would sell whatever, and I'm like, well, now I'm the guy who has to actually go make it work, right? I'm like, time and
Yeah.
money, I can do whatever you want. Um, and so that's where it's like, well, show me, right? Like, show me examples. Like if I want to have something where I recognize, okay, well, somebody came in through an app and they came in like non-logged in, onto .com. How am I able to sort of build a progressive profile of them and their sort of interactions? And then how am I able to use that to like sort of drive a dynamic experience? And if I want to change that dynamic experience, or if I want to have like somebody on my team, like a non-technical person on my team, then A/B test that dynamic experience.
Right.
Show me how you're doing that, right?
Hmm.
Like, sort of where are you getting your data from? Is it a CRM? Is it a data cloud? Is it like, are you plugging into Segment? Are you plugging into, like, it's just like, show me how it actually works. Um, and usually, like with the SEs or sort of other engineers on the vendor side, you can get through the BS like pretty quickly because like once they actually have to show you, right? Like
Yeah.
kind of like other examples, you can tell like kind of what's real and what's not, and know that like nothing is going to be perfect, right? Like there is no such thing as like buy versus
Yeah.
build or whatever. Like you could buy whatever you want, or you're always going to have to do some build. And so, like, I wouldn't say that it's fair to expect the vendor to be like, "Oh, we can do everything you want to do out of the box." And if
Yes.
anybody tells you that, like, that's a big BS thing, right? Where it's just like it doesn't
That's a great
exist,
point.
doesn't exist, or whatever. But you want to know what you're buying, right? And so it's like, show me like what you're good at, show me what you're not good at. These are the problems. How have you tried to solve this for other people who are like me? Where you're sort of that last mile, right? Where it's like, oh, your solution got your company here, but I need to be able to do this. Like, how would you think about it? Like, do you have other partners? Um, and it's okay. And you want a vendor. Sorry, it's a little bit of a rant.
No, it's
Um,
perfect. This is exactly, it's gold, I think.
for me, trust is my number one value.
Hmm.
And so I want vendors who are open about like, we're really good at that. We're not so good at this. These are the problems we're planning on solving. Obviously, our roadmaps can change, but
Hmm.
these are the problems that we're planning on solving. So that way it's like, I know that we can go together for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Cause like, okay, you're trying to solve my kind of problems or you're not, and you're open about it. And I want a vendor that is clear about we don't do these things, but we have these partners that help us. Right. And it's okay. Like you don't have to solve everything, but if like in your case, right, you guys just announced this big partnership with Netlify. And so it's okay to say like, hey, we do this, Netlify does that. Here's how it fits together. And here's why we think this combined solution is better than some of the monolithic things. Like I don't
Yeah,
expect Stackbit to do everything. I don't expect Netlify to do everything. Right. But it's like, how do you fit in this weird world with like, the cloud providers, the Git providers, the CMS provider, like show me
for
how you
sure.
fit. And it's okay that you don't do everything.
Yeah, I think this is, now that you're like formulating that thought this way, I think this is like looking at our best customers. Those are the ones that are um, coming in when we have a very honest discussion, because this is like a lot of the things we believe in. It's not only about combining all the pieces of the composable stack that will give you the solutions. At the end of the day, we believe that you have the control of designing your own like editing experience and the tools that you need. So, our one of the big mantras that we have at Stackbit is essentially allowing you maximum customizability of the editing environment. So some of the things are not even, it's not us or Netlify or the headless CMS or whoever. It's all about essentially like, how do you configure your content model? How do you decide what amount of control you give the marketing folks? Like, should they be able to control like the padding on specific elements, or is it no, like this is like a designer has worked very hard to maintain the brand of this specific page with these sections, and you can't like decide that this is like going to be a big button in the middle of the screen with like purple background and yellow polka dots because it will draw the eye, right? So I think um we believe in that partnership, and then it's like the ultimate buyer or customer is also a partner, if you will, in this whole thing, because they are the ones configuring these tools, right? Both configuring how they fit together, but also configuring how each one of them behaves, because a lot of these composable tools have a lot of control built into them, right? The more you behave like a walled garden and like have strong opinions that are also strongly held, then you can't make the changes, right? So I love the fact that you're already coming in with the realistic perception of there's no like silver bullet that will solve everything, right? And this is part of this composability, where you can like, oh, this thing fits here right now, and maybe I need to augment it with something else, and maybe I don't. And in the future, if my needs change, right, and now I need like an amazing experimentation engine, and I had a basic one before, if not all of it is bundled together, I can like swap out this vendor, or maybe even like need something so specific that I'll need to build this piece myself.
Yeah, I think all of what you said is true. I think the way that I would say it, in the sort of order that I would say it, would maybe change depending on audience.
Yeah, please.
Meaning, your best customers are the ones who are asking for what you already sell, right? And that's what you said. It's like,
that's a
we
good
know
point.
we want composable, we know we want these like bits or whatever. And so of course, right? Because they're the ones who've already like drank the Kool-Aid, they know what they want. Most CMOs would probably be afraid of most of what you said. Right. And that's one of the things that they like about the monolithic things, is they may not have flexibility, but it's like, it's safe. Right. There's sort of like very specific like guardrails of like, here's how you do things. This is where you're going to bump into the walls. You either do this or you can't do that.
Right.
And most CMOs are like, well, I understand that. Right. I've had 20 years of buying content management systems that work that way, and sort of web experience systems, digital experience systems that work that way. So they're like, I understand that. When you say, or you sort of start off with the, hey, you can do anything, that can be really scary, because it's like, well, how do I have control over my teams? How do I know like how much money I'm going to spend? How do I have control over investment? How do I know what kind of people to hire? Like, I need something a little bit more prescriptive. And so what I would probably do, apologies if you can hear that, I'm getting some sort of error.
No,
okay, cool. Clear. That's good. And so I would probably start off with the business problems, right? Which is like, what are you trying to solve? Like, as you're looking at your customer experience or your web experience, like, what are you trying to solve? Is it like, I want to be able to do dozens of experiments a day? Is it, I want to have my merchandiser be able to change experiences, XYZ or whatever within minutes, instead of having to go to IT? Is it, I've got 100 developers across 30 countries or whatever, and I just need them to be able to work together async? Is it whatever it is? But I would start with like, hey, Miss Marketer, like, you're looking for a solution. Like, what are you trying to do? Now, let me talk to you about like how the pieces could fit together for sort of a reality. And let me show you other companies that look like you. Right. Because if you start with like we could do everything, it's like, oh, that sounds scary. Right. But if you look at some of the big monolithic, it's like, well, we're a content management system. We have these 5 roles or whatever. Like, this person can publish, this person can edit, this person can build templates, and it's just safer.
Yeah. I think
hopefully that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And I think in many ways, we have when we're explaining, and demoing how things could look like, we have starters that are very, very technical and meant to help, the developers understand exactly how pieces fit together. And on the other hand, we have this flushed out demo that has already like pretty hefty, component kit already implemented with the right content model, and it's already connected to internationalization and analytics, and Algolia for search, and a personalization engine, and all these things. And what we often kind of see is like, people are like, well, can I get that one? Right?
Yeah.
And we're essentially, because like it is a great starting point, right? And I think you're right that it's scary to be like, I have the blank page, or I really like Legos, as you can see, and behind me, and the composable world lends itself really well to essentially like assembling whatever you want. But I can't build the Apollo rocket on my own with no instructions and just random pieces. So if I go and I have like all the pieces in the world, I will not be able to produce that, even though I'm pretty experienced and I know how to build. I need the instructions, right? I need a set, all the pieces I need, just the pieces I need, and the instructions. And I think at that point, I will feel more comfortable changing color, adding something,
That's right.
taking something out, but I already have the main structure in place. So does that resonate with you?
It does. I've used that example now for, I don't know, 15 years over
Hmm.
at Adobe and Heroku and some of the other companies. This idea of Legos,
Hmm.
right? Which is there are a bunch of different Lego blocks you can build or provide, right? The 2x2 and the 4x6 and the whatever, the wheel and the engine. But then you got to give people templates, right?
Right.
And so in your case, it's like the Apollo, it's a triplane, it's Hogwarts. It's just like you're
Yeah.
not necessarily going to build Hogwarts, right? But I can show you how you do it
Yes.
because in that, like, and especially for CMOs, but even for developers, right? Like that gives them, it's like recipes, right? It's like any recipe. It's like, okay, I
Hmm.
know where to start now. I understand how it fits together. And it also just really helps with the mental construct. And especially in this sort of composable world where there's like dozens of vendors and people sort of solve, it's like, well, we make the 4x4s and the 6x8s, but somebody else makes the 2x2s and the 2x4s. Really clarifying for people how they all fit together. And I mean, something that we've talked about, right? As like sort of the Git providers are trying to get out to the edge providers are trying to move down stack into sort of app management.
Hmm.
The web deployment companies are trying to move into deployment. And so it's like everyone's kind of like getting in each other's pools. Uh, as a non-technical person who's not in it every day, it's super confusing. Right.
Hmm.
And so the more that you could just sort of illustrate of like, yeah, like the waters are a little bit gray because the 2x4 makers are now making some 2x6s and we're all kind of like getting each other's, but it's like, here's roughly how we fit together. And again, for the business person, I would just always start with a business problem. Like, what are
Hmm.
you looking to solve? Is it speed? Is it, fast time to change, time to market? Is it, I want to run a dozen different experiences depending, like I want to have like real-time personalization. Is it whatever it could be? It's just like, you're trying to solve this problem for this type of company. Here's how the tech stacks can fit together. The more that you get to sort of show the recipes, right? And nobody's going to copy. Well, most people probably won't copy a recipe exactly, but at least then they understand sort of the mental
Right.
construct.
Yeah. Right. Um, so one of the things that we're also seeing kind of complements very well what you're saying is we see some companies that don't necessarily have that counterpart that you mentioned, the technical one that can advise you on the right stack. They go to digital agencies for
Yeah.
advice. And we have an agency partnership that we're supporting a lot of agencies that are essentially understand the modern stack and understand how Stackbit kind of helps provide this like one place where all you can edit all the tools, you can get input from all the tools in this one place without having to log into each one of them and without having to coordinate them. So we have those agencies and they serve maybe like system integrators, if you will,
Yeah.
in some ways. So I was curious, like, one, did you ever see like these successful partnerships with an agency? um and if so, if you are going to an agency, like, what are the things that you should be asking that agency when they recommend a specific solution to you?
Yes and yes. So in general, I go to agencies when I need like I'm going to call it one-off bespoke work, right?
Hmm.
It's not quite as pure as that, but it's like hey, I want to do a re-architecture and it's not an ongoing thing. So it doesn't make sense for me to hire a full-time permanent architect. I just need somebody to come in. And so the per hour is going to be more expensive, but it's like,
Hmm.
it's temporary work, right? It's
Right.
not like a forever thing. Or I go to an agency if I need like a fast track,
Hmm.
right? Which is like, well, it would take me 6 months and, to hire somebody and on ramp them or whatever, but I can get the agency, and sort of be in market in a month or two. Or if I need like people augmentation, which is like, I'm going to go do a replatforming or sort of a rebuild. I'm going to bring in the agency for 3 to 6 months just to kind of help me get a bunch of work done. And then after that, I go down to my team of 3 or 5 or whatever my sort of run rate team is. Um, and if you find the right agencies, and there's a lot of good agencies out there, they're pretty technology agnostic,
Hmm.
right? I mean, part of their job is they go out, they learn all the vendors, they learn all the sort of different recipes. They know what works because they're also on the hook quite often for delivery.
Yeah.
And so they're like, yeah, this really worked, or no, that's like smoke and mirrors. And so if you find the right agency, it may seem expensive, but ultimately from a time to market, and then again from a like, you don't necessarily need like a million data people, right? You maybe need one or two ongoing, but you need like 5 to sort of set up your initial data structure.
Yeah.
It's actually more cost efficient.
Hmm.
The way that I vet agencies is very similar to the way I mentioned about vendors, right? Of like, show me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who have you worked with or whatever? How would you build this? How would you approach it? Give me a credible plan, right? I'd be very mindful of people who are like, oh, we can do it, $50,000 in 3 months kind of thing. And they're like, they think it's ironclad.
Right.
It's almost never, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to find that right balance of you're going to be in the gray zone, if you don't want the meandering project that goes on for years and doesn't deliver, but you also don't want somebody who essentially like lies to you to get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
Both things are really common. And that's where it's like I try to get the credibility of like, show me, like, put me in touch with your technical team, put me in touch with your architecture team, put me in touch with your design team. Like, who would I actually work with? The other thing, regardless of the type of agency, agencies are only as good as the people that they actually put on your account.
Mm-hmm.
And agencies are infamous for putting the all-stars on the pitching part,
Got it.
right? And then you kind of get to the C team or whatever by the team who's like actually on your implementation. And so like I would really hold them to that around contractual commitments of like who's like I want to talk to who's going to actually be on my account, and I want to have like approval process or whatever if that person's not going to be on my account going forward. Like if you want to swap somebody out, because if not, I mean this is a part of agents, and most marketers are used to this. Like I mean agencies are always trying to put their all stars on landing the next account, right? And it's like no, I need to have the all star on my account. Like I don't care about your next account.
Yeah.
And so I'll just look at like who's actually working, for me. What have they done before? Like, show me what you've done. How do we work together? Right? Like, we need to make changes. Like, what kind of changes do you just sort of take as a matter of course versus what kind of changes require like more money and kind of going back to the drawing board? What do you need on my end? Like, how involved do I need to be? What kind of resources do you need them like every day? Do you need them all day? Do you just need them once a week? It's like, I would just be super specific, right? Around like, what do you need and how's it going to work? But I'm a big fan of bringing in agencies. And then in today's world, what's really common is agencies end up staying a lot longer than you expect.
Yes.
Right. Because we're all like going through hiring freezes and budget cutbacks, and there's like banking uncertainty. And so a lot of CFOs are like really hesitant to hire more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you're paying a lot more money for the project, just as a matter of practice or practicality, I guess,
Yes.
you're like, I got to get work done. Like I'm accountable for the work or whatever. I just can't hire the people. And so that's where agencies are good partners for that.
Got it. That makes me think about the top agencies we work with usually also use Stackbit internally, right? So and the way now I was always thinking about this in terms of efficiency, right? Because like you can get a lot of things done inefficiently just by like throwing more, brute force at it, right? And so, for example, and if we're going back to Legos, you could, if you're working so in this like new world of like composable and headless, the separation of code and content is amazing because now you can like actually change each one of them independently, right? So you can change the content and you can go live on production theoretically without being dependent on a developer. I think the conflation happens when the storage of the composable, headless CMS ends up being also the editing interface, which that doesn't make sense because it's like it's just operating blindly usually, right? So if I go back to the Lego, it's like I'm trying to build something, and I can feel, if I close my eyes, I can still feel the pieces. I can still probably make them fit together. I can count with my fingers, how many, like studs do they have, and make them fit. I won't obviously see the color and stuff like that. And then I can be like, if I'm lucky, I have a preview that's not production. And then I'm like taking it behind, the screen, and I'm looking at it. It's like not exactly what I wanted, and I'm going to put it back, right, and try it again. So you do it enough times, right? You could get to what you wanted, right? But you'll get to it way faster if you can actually see the pieces and work on it, right? So we're increasing the efficiency for companies, but I was also thinking about increasing the efficiency for agencies, because agencies are coming in, they have this like kit of components that's already built, and now they can assemble it. What you said essentially makes me think that it is not only about the internal efficiency of the agency, it's also about the consistency, which, to your point, is, I think, the sign of quality. I don't need the superstar possibly anymore, because the superstar is probably working on the components and building the component kit and building those building blocks. And then I have people that are, maybe very creative and talented, but they just need to assemble those together, and they already
Yeah.
fit because they've been built correctly. So I'm now excited not just about the efficiency of it, but just like the quality aspect that we help do.
Yeah, it is a really good point, which is you want to be mindful of who's on your account. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need the superstar. So an example might be uh, a really expensive full stack developer who you need for like initial template creation.
Exactly.
You probably don't need that person on an ongoing basis because you're probably going to be paying, I don't know, $250 an hour or something like that for this person.
Right.
And ultimately, once you got your dozen templates or whatever you kind of need, you just need somebody who can make like minor modifications. And that could be like a junior front end developer. Right. And so somebody you're paying like 80, 100 grand or whatever it is, like sort of cheaper because you're like, I just need to make dozens of changes relatively quickly. I still need that person to be really good. I just don't need them to be like this sort of all purpose, sort of expensive superstar. And so it is. It's like being mindful of like, yeah, who's on your account, kind of what they're doing, like what skills do you need, making sure you're not overpaying for, like the superstar who can do all the things. You're like, well, I don't really actually need all the things anymore. I just need this one thing, but I need it now at scale.
Yeah. So, I think I wanted to ask you another thing, which is like whenever we're thinking about changing, our infrastructure, especially, but, in general, our website, our applications, I think how do you usually treat that period, right, in between, right? Because like I've gone through like phases where it's like, oh, okay, we can't touch the old system because it's now frozen and we're migrating to the new system. But in the new system, I can't make changes right now because it's not complete. So I have like this whole migration process that happens. So I'm like, I end up being kind of frozen for sometimes 9 months until like everything transitions over and has moved. So one of the things that we've been seeing is that because you have like one interface that you can put in place, but it can connect to different to these like different backends and different content sources and whatnot, it kind of makes that transition easier. So I wanted to like get your perspective on that period of migration and how you've treated it in the past and how important it is to have continuity.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different answers. One is for, I don't know, call it the last 8 years, something like that. I really don't see it. I'm sure if I thought hard enough, I could think of an example where that sort of monolithic cutover might still make sense for some use cases. I don't see that as a best practice in most use cases, which is, yeah, you're going to have like some monolithic stack or whatever. You want to spin up new things. And so what I do is I start moving over like workflows. Right. So I'm never like a blackout or whatever. Like I don't go into like an IT blackout. I just don't know how you could do that in today's world. And so I start spinning up new experiences. Like back when I was in IT, I would call it like lift and shift, right? Where it's kind of like, oh, we had this new thing. And then over time we start moving like workflows over. And so like if I were running a web experience, I would say, okay, like what are the key sort of customer journeys or whatever that I want to modify? Let's start putting those on the new system. And then over time, we'll move the things off the old system, but I never go into a blackout. And you set like sort of rules for yourself, right? Which is like, you can't completely lock down the old system because you still have business to do. And so you say, you know what, we're going to do 20% of changes maybe that we used to do. We're not going to do like, massive big investments, but if we need to change like some components or whatever, like we still have a development team. That team doesn't go away. And so I would think about it like that, which is like sort of your I don't know. I'd probably blank on the word I'm looking for, right? But you're sort of spinning up the new experience. You're sort of moving things over kind of one at a time. You still have like some team allocated to the old experience. The second part of what you said, I think, is super critical, and one of the big selling points of Composable is, I mean, the whole idea of like continuous deployment, continuous integration, the sort of CI/CD, all that stuff. I mean, it's been around now for like 10 plus years, right? And so this idea of you're sort of like literally like flipping bits. I want to think Stackbit. You're literally like flipping bits on like, is it ready for production or not? And the stuff's constantly integrating and deploying. And if something's not ready, it's not ready. It's not a big deal because it could deploy an hour from now, a day from now. Like everything's independent. It doesn't really matter. And especially that abstraction layer of like, the business experience or the, sort of business logic, the user experience, the content management system, the product identification system, all the different things sort of being abstracted is like I can make changes to the user experience, no dependency on my customer database, my CRM, sort of any of those systems, or vice versa,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're factoring your code the right way, and you're aware of the breakpoints, and that way, like migrations aren't as hard, right? I mean, you're like, I can
Yeah.
change the user experience anytime. Doesn't matter. I can change the business logic anytime. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not redoing my whole website because I changed my CRM system or I changed my customer database. Um, it is. I mean, it sounds scary, right? When you're like, oh my gosh, there's like dozens of vendors providing dozens of Lego blocks or whatever composable. Like that sounds very technical, but that's one of the things that it enables, right? Is you're not like sort of married to this monolithic thing of like I can't change anything because everything's like so integrated that if I try to change any one thing, my pricing structure, my tax system, everything else breaks, right? Everything has to go into like this 9-month blackout. And I know that companies still do that or whatever, but I haven't seen that as a best practice for most customer facing experiences. And like I said, probably almost a decade
Mm-hmm.
at this
Mm-hmm.
point.
Got it. Yeah. So I think, kind of to going into like the starting to summarize, the call that we've had, it sounds like a lot of the important things are to allow yourself the flexibility, both to like make changes quickly on the website and adjust it to business needs. Also to change like the whole, like be able to define that your business needs have changed completely, and also change the underlying infrastructure. And even though it's scary, right, a little bit, and like it has a lot of technology and technology innovation right now. The world is also changing for technologists, right? It's not just for marketing. It is important to maintain that flexibility and that ability to move quickly and have like a stable base, but continue making changes as things progress. And it sounds like also it is probably advised to educate yourself a little bit more about the world and the technology in it, but you don't have to go too deep into the details. What you need is to find a good partner, either on your team or external with an agency or something like that, to be able to to stay informed and ultimately serve the business need, right?
Yeah, there's at this point, there are a ton of good resources out there, right? If you look at like the Mock Alliance, the
Mm-hmm.
Headless Consortium, the Composable, there's a bunch of companies like sort of in the different composable groups. If you look at any of the big like Forrester, Gartners, IDC, like they're all pretty educated. If you look at any of the big or even small sort of digital agencies, like this idea has now been around for 8-ish or so years, has really been kind of mainstreamed in the last 3 to 4 years. And so it's moving up the maturity curve, right? And so at this point, like there's a lot of resources out there. So even if you're a non-technical marketer, I mean, there's a ton of free papers, there's a ton of good agencies. Even if you don't end up paying those agencies anything, like it's just good to talk to them and kind of understand like what's out there, I would get educated, and again, like anybody who is still fighting it, and I know that there's a lot of people fighting it. I just worry that it's like, like I said, the digital transformation that retail went through 10 to 15 years ago, where you look at some of the old school, like big retail companies that are dying,
Yeah.
right? Because they just can't keep up, like Amazon's eating their lunch, right? And it's like, well, how do I Amazon? It's like, well, it took Amazon 20 years to do that, right?
Yeah.
And billions of dollars over 20 years or whatever. And at this point, your company's now hurting. So you just don't have the money anymore to be able to do what you should have done 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. I expect, we'll probably have like if we're getting a lot of questions, as we usually kind of do when we're talking to customers, because as to your point, we're also having these discussions that are really high level. And a lot of the people are not necessarily like ready right now, and they're coming back like months later. It's like, okay, we've evaluated and thought about it. So similarly, as we get more questions, I might have another session with you to ask you more,
please.
your opinions. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Anytime, Dan.